It's a brand new season here at On the Path, and we are so excited to continue the conversations that matter. And we are talking today about overcoming challenges in one of the most challenging seasons of all of our lives. Goodness gracious, guys, coming up next, we are speaking with Dr. Danisha Keating. She's the author of From Foster to PhD and Faith Through the Desert. This is a woman that overcome the foster care system. She literally lived, guys, in over 30 addresses growing up. She's a survivor of abuses you couldn't imagine, and she's going to teach us how to overcome internal and external challenges. She's going to talk about how to get unstuck from the damages of our past and also how to overcome what she calls the beast of imposter syndrome. This is for anyone that wants to move forward and step into the big things that God's called them to do. Available on all podcast platforms. You can stream it into the Castle TV. You can watch it on Yes TV. You can watch it on YouTube. And guys, let's move forward and overcome. I'll see you on the path.
You're listening to On the Path podcast with Cheryl Nembhard, brought to you by Fight for Freedom. Follow Cheryl Nembhard on all social media platforms.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On the Path. I'm so excited to have you with me. As I always say, with us, we are in the classroom of life. We are learning from the challenges and the hard stories of other teachers who are showing us along the way how they've overcome, what they've learned, and what we need to know to follow this beautiful path that God has carved out for all of us. Well, I am so excited about this conversation. This is a lady I have the privilege of doing life with. And the moment I heard her story, I knew we had to have her here on the path. We're talking about overcoming challenges with this incredible guest. Let me introduce her to you. Dr. Danisha Keating has worked in higher education for 7 years, and Danisha Keating graduated from Grand Canyon University with a PhD in psychology. She devotes her time to helping others. She loves students, and she helps them with their educational goals and advocating for foster youth. Her dissertation on best practices of foster youth support programs at community colleges in California. She's also has a large portion of her study that shows that foster youth students face homelessness, drug addiction, financial and emotional challenges, as well as academic hardships throughout college. And she's the author of an incredible book, which you're not going to believe the story, but it is a true story of her life, from foster care to PhD, y'all. Somebody say amen to that. And Faith Through the Desert. Talk about a poster child of overcoming challenges. Will you welcome Dr. Danisha Keating?
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you here on the path. Listen, I could have read even more. It's incredible what you have done with your life, but your life did not start off so grand. Can I say it that way?
Yeah.
And I believe that behind every world changer, there is a huge story that changed their world forever. I'd love for you to just take a couple of minutes and unpack the beginnings of Danisha's life.
So there was a lot. But basically, I was born into a big family. I wasn't, I was fourth oldest of 11. But throughout the years, there was a lot of abuse that changed kind of the trajectory of our lives. We grew up in the church. But the abuse that happened was also spiritual, not just physical and other types of abuses, but spiritual abuses is one. I don't want to label it and say it's the worst, but it's so much harder when you start putting God on things and it's not true. But that led to not the spiritual abuse, but just the physical and the neglect. That led to foster care for me and my siblings in 2005. And that was the first time I actually was into the educational system because we were homeschooled before my freshman year of high school. And then I found a lot of hardship within education in high school, decided still that I wanted to go to college, started that journey and was homeless immediately when I turned 18 and kind of house hopped from 18 to 24. I've had over 33 different addresses in that time frame. I lived in my car for a full year. Still tried to get through community college and then got through that and transferred and then got a call to first pick up one brother, then that led to two brothers, and then that led to five total siblings in a one bedroom, one bathroom home, because the abuse didn't stop. It kept going. They just got smarter on how they hid it. Um, but even raising siblings when going through school, it's just a lot harder. You're a single parent, but you're a sibling of that parent, of those children. And people don't recognize that the same way as someone who would be a foster parent or a grandparent stepping in. It's a little bit different, but it has been an incredible journey getting through school while raising them. And they're grown up now. And looking back, I'm like, wow, from 2009 to 2021, getting all of my educational stuff done was about 13 years, but it was a very weird door to close because it was, this is the goal, but there's so much fear in the unknown. And I knew school, I knew what to expect. I knew there was classes, but then stepping out, I thought it was interesting to hear a lot of people say like, hey, you're in foster care, or we're in foster care and look where you're at now. But it's like, no one really wanted that story outside of a PhD. So it's kind of like, but look at all the other things. But I realized that as there are statistics, you have a statistic of most foster care are going to be homeless by the age of 26, at least once for 6 months. You have a statistic of drug use and alcohol use and being in jail, but you don't have a lot of success stories of just getting out of that lifestyle because foster care tends to be generational. So this, I think, is why so many people are like, wow, we're recognizing the good that you're doing along the way. So I wrote my story from foster to PhD because my hope is that people would see foster care kids doing anything that's legal and good and their goals in life. They're from foster to blanks, and say, that's good enough for me to cheer you on. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to be president. You don't have to make millions of dollars. You could be someone who's just a kind person and not repeating the cycle of your family. And that's what spurred me writing from foster to PhD, was because so many people only saw the good once the PhD was labeled. And then they heard that it was from foster to PhD. But then when you sit in rooms talking about like, how do they get to that level that you're on? I've had to remind them, like, everyone's story is different and it's just as good as my story. It's not different or worse or not as good. It is just as good as getting that PhD because it's their goal in life, not ours. So I wanted, and my prayer and my hope is that people can hear that and push that narrative versus it's only something good when it's big, and that's why I wrote my story.
Oh my goodness, Danisha, I have to just highlight some things that I heard. I could not believe when you said, my stomach just went into knots when you said over 30 addresses at one point in your life that you had experienced. Yeah. Also, rescuing your siblings, raising your siblings as a young person yourself, now with the extra burden, if you will, of being a parent or trying to step into that role, not being recognized in that role. There's challenges there. Trying to get your education, trying to break the cycle. It's unbelievable. You're like, I can't wait to dive in a little bit more. But you also did this incredible dissertation on foster care, and you've been a fierce advocate ever since. And I feel like it's a topic we don't get enough dialogue around. Let's just talk just briefly about there's unique challenges. Obviously, at-risk youth have certain challenges, but there's unique challenges when you come from the foster care system. Please enlighten us in that.
So a big statistic in the US is that 50% of foster youth will not graduate high school. And a lot of people immediately come down to like, well, why? Like, what are they not doing? How are they not doing that? What are we not, like, where are we failing as an education system? And sometimes what it is that it's just that the young adult is moved so many times within their educational journey. I know one individual I talked to said he was moved 8 times in high school and he just ended up doing a GED. I've known others who said, I only was placed in one home and stayed there my entire life. So it's case by case, but the majority of foster youth are missing a foundation for education. If it's something like they don't have an IEP, which is helping with their learning disability or their physical disability to give them accommodations. If it's that they were moved 8 times, they're not getting that whole semester in class. And that's something I personally experienced. Is I got into my freshman year. It was March. The school year ended in June, which means I lost the whole first semester and almost all of the other one. Yeah, my high school counselor goes, I'm not even going to try with you. I'm not wasting my time on you. I know where you came from. I'm not putting my
Wow.
energy into you when you're just going to end up at the continuation school, drop out and pregnant. And I'm like, this is like day one meeting this man. And I sat back and realized I'm not the only one. And then that kind of stemmed
Mm.
in like all of this, like let's first my study started with, I want to implement something, I want to do a program because I didn't get support in college, and college is so hard. And then as I dug into research, I'm like, California has all of these support programs available, but it wasn't implemented until 2015 when I went to a university. So it started getting implemented slowly because there was a need, but then it's now recognized that the other issues educationally is that physically we don't have support to get to school sometimes. We emotionally don't have the support from family or friends. It usually is a conversation of, you're dumb. Why are you going to college? You're no good. Why waste your time? Why waste your money? Go get a job. But then there's also the relational thing where, and this is what I faced as well, is going to school means you can't earn money. And most young adults who are in the foster care system, they don't focus on the future. They're focusing on what they have to do for their family in the current. So some of them are raising siblings. Some of them are taking care of their parents. Some of them are
Mm.
they're just trying to get on their feet. So they age out of the system at 18 or 21, and they're immediately moved from their foster home and said, go figure it out. There are support programs available that help the young adult, but if you don't qualify for that, you don't get that. And that was in my case, as there was a lot of things I didn't qualify for. And people are always so shocked by that because they're like, but you were in foster care. Labels matter in the foster care system. And my case was not put down as a case that was foster care. It was a voluntary case, which meant that the parents were doing what they were supposed to and working with CPS so they could
Mm.
close the file and still have monitoring, still do all the things you would do if you were in foster
Wow.
care. But because that label was different, they said, you don't get any of these resources. And that actually happened again when I took in my
Wow.
siblings. And that is a huge issue for some foster youth, is that they don't get access to the resources. Once they age out,
Mm.
they lose all access to caseworkers, people in the system, and they're just like, okay, go do it by yourself. And that's why the support programs exist out here, is because they're like, this is not okay. If you were one day in the foster care system, if you were in your entire life, we need to treat it the same way because it still impacts you the same way. It hurts here. Even if you're
Goodness.
okay
Yeah.
emotionally, it still hits here. And then you go, okay, well, now I can't because of these things. And that is where
Wow.
hearing a lot of people kind of say like, hey, this is what we've been doing. And then looking at, like, if you really look at a timeline, you're like, oh, we really haven't gone that far, but we've gone far, but it just doesn't feel
Mm.
like it because sometimes
Yeah.
it's inching forward. But when we look at the holistic
Yeah.
picture, we're like, oh, look how far we've come. But then you sit with foster youth
Right.
and they go, I experienced that same thing in the 60s. I experienced that same things in 2019 or 1999 and 2005 and 2023. And we're like, wow, we really haven't come that far. So it can get very
Wow.
discouraging when we look at the research.
Mm. Oh my goodness. And when I look at you, Denisha, I mean, there's a phrase, I don't look like what I've been through. And I feel like you are that poster child for that. You
Mm.
don't look like anything you've been through. And I would love to know, I'm sure everyone is curious because your story is just so huge. What were your internal challenges, external challenges? What did you have to overcome? I can't even imagine just to get where you are.
There was so much. And I feel like there was more internal than external factors. Like, yeah, money. I didn't have money, didn't have places, didn't have family. Those are big things. But internally, it was more mental and emotional than I think it could have ever been. But the biggest thing I think for me was the self doubt, the imposter syndrome, the why am I even here? Because when you don't have your purpose in life, and you strive to try to find what that is, and every time you try it gets hit down, you're like, why am I even here? And then you add in like, oh, you're not loved, you're not wanted, you're the black sheep. And I know so many of us have heard that, like, you're the black sheep, you don't really fit in with your family and friends. I've always been told that. I also don't feel the age that I am. I'm 34 now, but I feel like I'm like 80 because I'm just like, I'm so exhausted sometimes because it's just like, man, my story is exhausting. But I felt that at 24 too. I was like, wow, I'm 24, but I'm really like 55 because I have teenagers and I'm doing all this stuff. So there's always been this, and it's not a good thing. I'm not being like, oh, I'm older than what I really am. Like, look at me, so what wise. It's more of like, I have years mentally and emotionally, which means mentally and emotionally, I'm in a very different space. And sitting with someone who's hurting because they stubbed their toe, I'm just like, come on. But I'm like, whoa, that's hard for them. Like, let's sit with that hard with them. Their hard is not my hard, but it doesn't lessen their hard. And that is one of the internal issues I've had, where it's just like, girl, you need to be more compassionate. Like, you need to pull it back. And then there's the imposter syndrome of, I don't belong here. I'm not wanted. I know this, but I don't know this information. I look at other people and see where they're at, and I don't see all the work that they've done. But I'm sitting here going, I don't belong here, even though I do. But I psych myself out and I turn myself away from opportunities because I'm like, I'm not good enough. They're going to find out like that I'm just not good enough. And it's not, that's been the hardest battle for me.
Oh my goodness. I totally can relate. Just especially that piece about having come from a hard life and hearing others' current versions of hard and lacking compassion and and understanding, because I just can't get it.
Yeah.
But then finding this place of, like you said, their heart is not my heart, and it's, to them it's challenging, and sit with them in it, be with them in it. Don't judge it, don't measure it. I love that. So good. You know, that idea of feeling stuck, feeling pinned by the challenges of your past is something you're really passionate about overcoming. Talk to me about, like, how do we not let it hold us back?
Fear is a liar. Fear is often what we try to make decisions in. And when we are stuck by our past, it usually is something that we're afraid of. I know for me personally, there was a lot of healing that had to happen before I could recognize that I wasn't even a 13-year-old kid anymore. So even though mentally sometimes I feel older, there were horrible years where I felt like if I was with certain people, I was suddenly 13 again, and I was fighting for things. But when we're stuck in really, I think when we're stuck in what's the past, it usually is something we want an answer to. We don't want to feel crazy for what we went through. Maybe we are self-doubting what actually happened. My parents used to say all of the time that we were brainwashed. We didn't really go through that. We read some book or watched some TV, and then it's like we find journals. Like, I found a journal from when I was in my teens, and I'm like, this is a detailed account of what I went through. I didn't watch TV at that point. Like, that we watched I Love Lucy. That's not on that show. but you start to get stuck in the past when you want answers. And I don't think that that's wrong, but when we don't get those answers, we have to look at it and say, am I willing to move to healing, or am I willing to stay where I'm at and be here in 10 years from now? Or do I want to be in a better position, at least mentally and emotionally? Or do I want to just stay where I'm at? And if I want to stay where I'm at, that's on you. But for me, that doesn't feel comfortable because I don't like how I was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I wanted to have a conversation where I didn't look at someone and say, you're out to get me. You're no good for me. You're just going to beat me up. I wanted to look at people and say, you know what, you have a good intention. Now, I'm jaded, for sure. I'm jaded. But I do have to consistently pull myself back and say, Danisha, is this really that situation, or is this a very small percentage? Probably is a very small percentage, but if I want to move to a place of recognizing the truth, I have to be honest about my past and then say, okay, what do I want to gain from this? Do I want to move forward? I know Beth Moore says it. She was in a podcast and she said, a lot of people will ask, like, what you went through, like, are you proud of what you went through? Or, you know, is it something that you would say is good that you went through. And she's like, no, these things are not good. They matter, but they're not good. I'm not like, hey, it was worth it. Nobody looks at their pain and goes, yeah, that was 100% worth it. We go, it matters to the bigger story that we can't see right now. And I can look back at my life and say that moment where I said, okay, I need to ask my question if I want to stay here emotionally and mentally, or if I would like to go forward into something that could be better. Though that was a pivotal
Yeah.
moment for me to say, am I going to let fear drive my whole life and pain, or am I going to let it matter one day? And there were moments where I would be like 15,
Mm.
22, 25, sitting in my car and being like, if someone asked me to go on stage right now, what would I say to myself if I was sitting there? And then I'm like, oh, I'm not worthy. But I'm like, let me just do this because I need to coach myself through this hard right now so I can get to
Wow.
tomorrow. And that is not something where I was like, yeah, I'm going to get on stage one day. I had no idea. I was just like, my story's not done. Until it's done, I can't stand up there. And then someone said,
Wow.
your story is never done if you're still breathing. And God can work through that
Mm.
story. So let him do the driving and you just show up. And I'm like, oh, that means I need to heal because I'm going to go on and word vomit some stuff that is not so great. And we want to make sure we're not hurting
So
people when we share.
So good. I feel like I'm gonna throw that heavy title, Doctor Denisha, because come on, she worked hard for that
Yeah.
PhD. Dr. Denisha, you are now you're just thriving and
Mm,
flourishing in the area of psychology and coaching and getting people really over the challenges of their past, you having lived it like in the in the first person in
mm,
such a hard way. Tell us a little, like, help us now, if people that are facing challenges, because you said our challenges are different,
mhm.
our everyone's hard is different, but when we're facing challenges and we feel like we can't overcome them, help us. What are some of the things we should be thinking, or the thoughts? Like, how do we reroute our brain? What should we be saying? Like,
Mm.
even like faith stuff, like, just how do we overcome challenges?
It's hard because there's a lot, and this is where I would come in with questions first. And it's not just, hey, what are you afraid of? Because we might not know what that fear is, but I can say, what choice can you make today that you would be proud of in 10 years from now? And that was posed by a art
Oh, that's
teacher
good.
who I had in college,
Wow.
and Mr. Clark. He passed away a couple years ago, but every single student who has had him has said he always asked us that question. If you woke up in 10 years from now, would you be happy with the choice you made? And if not, make that choice. And so start there. First say, like, does this choice, will it impact tomorrow? No. Am I going to stress myself out over this just to stress myself out? Maybe. But if I'm happy with the choice that I make, then I kind of have to let everything else go first. But if you want to walk through to say, okay, I'm going to start dealing with this. This is a journey. This is not a one and done. And I think sometimes we go in and we go, okay, fix it, Jesus. Let's walk away now, and it's done. And it's like there are levels of the healing and mental game that we have to play with ourselves to be able to
Mm.
say, 10 years, I still struggle with imposter syndrome and self-doubt and fear, but it looks different now because 10 years ago I would be like, oh, I'm not doing that. Now I'm like, why am I afraid? That's my question now. Why am I afraid? Because that's where past Denisha has gone and been, but also past Denisha now, current Denisha now gets to see what past Denisha made choices for. So I know the choices I make today are going to impact my tomorrow. So if I just make a good choice, it's going to be what it is. And if that good choice looks different every day, that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail and fall, but we got to get back up and start. So it's like, why don't I like why I'm here? We might not be content with where we're at, but we can make the choice to be happy with the choices because that's something tangible. I'm not going to be content every single season of my life, but if I focus on my choices, I can say, you know what, but I made a good choice. It was the right choice in that season. I would do it differently this time, or I would do it the exact same. But let me make that choice to step forward.
Oh, I love that. Um, we were speaking in our pre-interview about, and you just mentioned it, and you used this phrase. It just ripple through me. Talk to us a little bit about imposter syndrome. You talked about it being a beast.
Oh,
Just give us like a
yes.
minute thought on imposter
Yes.
syndrome.
Imposter syndrome is not my favorite. It is definitely something that I feel that is internal and externally viewed. Um, and we were talking about just kind of like how I view it is that there's three different types of imposter syndrome. They can happen at the same time. But first, it's internal, my doubts, what I'm not capable of. Why am I here? Why am I being asked to do this? I am not capable of doing XYZ. Then there is the relational here where I go, well, they've invited me. I know what I'm talking about, but I'm still afraid. I'm still afraid to be exposed or seen. And that's just normal. But then we take it to another level and say, well, I want to go in that direction, but I can't because somebody else is already in that spot. And then we make it a competition. And we go, well, we're not good enough, or so and so does it like this, and I'm not important. And this is all fear driven. It's all stuck in the fear. And for me, it has been a game where I have to say, so and so can do it too. And I listened to a podcast. Her name is Jasmine Star. So people need to listen to her because she's great. But she said it the best. And like I put this in my brain sometimes is everyone is allowed to do the same thing, but we all bring something different. Who you reach is going to be different than who I reach. And we're both needed in those reaches. But we can do that together. We can do that differently. We can do that the exact same thing, but none of us can bring what the other person has to the table. And that's changed how I look at other people. It's no longer a competition. We're all bringing ourselves to the network of people that need us to be in that network. We don't overstep. We don't compete. We could say the exact same thing, but we're saying it different to different people. And that has changed and shifted my imposter syndrome a lot.
Guys, we're talking with Dr. Danisha Keating. My goodness, powerhouse, overcomer herself. She's the author of From Foster to PhD and Faith Through the Desert, available wherever books are sold. Danisha, how can we keep in touch with you and track with what you're doing? Give us your socials and how we can follow you.
So you can follow me on everything as Dr. Danisha Keating, Dr. Danisha space Keating on Facebook, and then Dr. Danisha Keating all together on Instagram and TikTok. You can absolutely get the books from Amazon. They're right there. But you can email me at danishakeating@gmail.com. I love when people ask questions and just say, hey, how can I do this in my life? And I love being able to just help offer that as well.
Wow, I want to thank Dr. Danisha for being on the path. What an incredible conversation, guys. I want to encourage you to keep doing the work, keep showing up, and literally know that God has called you to those specific things. You are not like anyone else. No one can do it like you. We're going to shed imposter syndrome together. We're going to overcome our challenges, and we're going to step into the big things that God's called us to do. Until then, keep living, keep learning, keep loving, guys, and keep overcoming. I'll see you on the path.
Thank you for listening to On the Path podcast with Cheryl Nembhard, brought to you by Fight for Freedom. Please like, download, and subscribe. This has been an Exousia Media production.